You think you chose this video. You didn't. Not really. Something else chose it for you, seconds before you were even aware of making a decision. And if that sentence made you a little uncomfortable, good. Stay with that feeling for a moment, because it's the same feeling that shows up every single day of your life, quietly, underneath choices you assume are yours. Here's the strange part. Most people walk around believing they are the author of their own decisions. You wake up. You decide what to eat. You decide what to say. You decide who to trust. You decide who to love. It feels like a straight line. Thought, then choice, then action. Clean. Simple. Yours. But what if that order is backwards? Imagine you're standing in front of a fridge at 11 at night. You're not hungry. You just ate 2 hours ago. And yet your hand is already reaching for the door before your mind has finished the sentence. I probably shouldn't. Have you noticed that the reaching happens first? The justification comes after. You tell yourself a story about why it's fine. Just this once, and that story arrives so fast, so smoothly, that it feels like the reason you did it. It wasn't. It was the explanation for something that had already been decided somewhere else. This is where it gets fascinating. In the late 20th century, a neuroscientist ran an experiment that quietly shook the foundations of how we think about free will. He asked people to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it. No pressure, no pattern, just whenever the urge arrived. While they did this, he measured the electrical activity in their brain. What he found was unsettling. The brain showed a spike of activity, a kind of readiness signal, before the person consciously felt the urge to move. Not after, before. In other words, the decision was already forming in the machinery of the brain before the person's conscious mind caught up and said, I want to move now. Now sit with that for a second. If that's true even for something as small as flicking a wrist, what does it mean for the decisions that actually shape your life? The job you took, the person you texted back, the argument you picked, the apology you didn't give. But wait, this isn't about proving you have no control. That's not the point. And honestly, that's the boring version of this story. The real question is more interesting than do I have free will? The real question is, who exactly is doing the deciding if it isn't the calm, rational version of you that you imagine is in charge? Think about it like this. Inside your mind, there isn't one single decision maker sitting at a desk, weighing pros and cons like a judge. There are multiple systems running in parallel, often disagreeing with each other. And what you experience as deciding is usually just the loudest one winning the argument before the others even finish speaking. There's the part of you shaped by evolution, ancient, fast, built for survival, not for accuracy. It doesn't care about your 5-year plan. It cares about immediate reward, immediate safety, immediate belonging. This is the part of your brain that lights up with dopamine the moment you feel your phone buzz, long before you've read the message. You're not checking your phone because you decided information matters right now. You're checking it because a chemical circuit that kept your ancestors alive by noticing sudden changes in their environment has been hijacked by a notification sound. Then there's the part of you shaped by your childhood. This one is quieter, but somehow even more powerful. Psychologists who study attachment have long pointed out that the emotional patterns you formed with your earliest caregivers don't just disappear. They become a kind of invisible script that runs underneath your adult relationships. If you learned early on that love had to be earned through performance, some part of you is still trying to earn it in your job, in your friendships, in the way you over-explain yourself in a simple text message. You think you're choosing to work late again, but maybe a much younger version of you is the one really making that call, still trying to prove something to someone who isn't even in the room anymore. Here's what nobody talks about. This isn't a flaw. It's not something broken in you. It's simply how minds are built. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, reasoning, delaying gratification, is often described as the thinking brain. but it's not actually the first responder. It's more like a manager who shows up after the initial reaction has already happened and tries to make sense of it, tries to justify it, tries to keep the story of "I am a rational person" intact. That's only part of the story, though, because there's another layer underneath all of this, one that's even harder to notice. Social psychologists have spent decades studying something called conformity, the tendency for people to shift their opinions, their preferences, even their perception of reality, simply because of what the people around them seem to believe. In one of the most famous demonstrations of this, researchers found that when enough people in a room confidently gave an obviously wrong answer, a significant number of participants abandoned what their own eyes were telling them and agreed with the group instead, not because they were pressured, not because they were threatened, just because being wrong alone felt more dangerous than being wrong together. Now think about your own life. How many opinions do you hold that actually came from careful, private reasoning? And how many of them quietly arrived because everyone around you already believed them, and disagreeing felt like stepping outside a circle of safety you didn't even realize you needed? It gets even stranger. Your memory, the thing you rely on to make decisions based on past experience, isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it, slightly differently, shaped by your current mood, your current beliefs, even by what someone else recently told you about that same event. This means the you who's making a decision today isn't referencing a perfect archive of your past. You're referencing a story that has been quietly rewritten again and again, often to protect your self-image rather than to reflect what actually happened. So, when you decide not to trust someone because they always do this, ask yourself, is that a pattern you observed or a narrative you've been rehearsing? Now here's the part that tends to catch people off guard. If so much of what feels like you deciding is actually ancient instinct, childhood conditioning, social pressure, and reconstructed memory, does that mean you're just a passenger? Does that mean the sense of choosing anything at all is an illusion? Not quite. And this is where the story turns. Because there is one thing that separates you from simply reacting on autopilot, and it isn't the absence of these forces. It's your growing awareness of them. Psychologists who study self-regulation describe this as the difference between being driven by an impulse and noticing an impulse. The impulse to check your phone, to snap at someone you love, to avoid a hard conversation, that impulse will still arise. It always will. But the moment you can observe it, rather than simply obey it, something remarkable happens. The gap between stimulus and response widens just slightly. And in that widened gap is the closest thing to actual choice that a human being gets. This is why some of the most emotionally mature people you know don't necessarily feel less. They still get triggered. They still feel the old childhood wound flare up. They still feel the dopamine pull of a notification, the fear of standing out from the group, the ancient urge to defend their ego in an argument they know they're wrong about. The difference is, they've built a habit of noticing the wave before it crashes, instead of being swept up inside it and calling the swept up version me. Have you noticed how right after you snap at someone you love, there's often a split second, almost too fast to catch, where some quiet part of you already knew it was the wrong reaction? That quiet part isn't weaker than the reactive part. It's just slower to speak. And in a world built for speed, on fast scrolling, fast replies, fast reactions, the slower voice rarely gets the microphone. This is also why identity matters so much in decision-making. Not identity as in your job title or your personality test result, but identity as in the story you keep telling yourself about who you are. If you believe, somewhere underneath the surface, I am someone who always gives in, then giving in will keep feeling like the obvious, natural choice, even when it costs you. Not because you lack willpower, but because your brain is remarkably efficient at protecting consistency. It would rather you make a decision that confirms an old identity than one that feels unfamiliar, even if the unfamiliar one is healthier. Some psychologists believe this is one of the quiet reasons people repeat the same relationship patterns, the same career mistakes, the same arguments, even when they consciously want something different. The conscious want is real, but it's competing against a much older, much more automatic system whose only job is to keep the story of you feeling continuous and safe. So who is really making your decisions? The honest answer is messier than a single sentence, but here it is anyway. It's a committee, an ancient survival instinct that reacts before you think, a childhood pattern that whispers what love and safety are supposed to look like, a social pressure system that quietly checks what the group believes before you're even aware you're checking, a memory system that edits the past to protect your self-image in the present. And somewhere in the middle of all of that noise, a small, quiet observer, the part capable of noticing the whole performance instead of simply starring in it. That observer is you, not the loudest voice, the one that watches. And the strange, almost comforting truth is this. The moment you stop assuming that every impulse, every urge, every immediate reaction is the real you, you actually gain more freedom, not less. Because now you're not obligated to obey every voice in the committee. You get to listen, notice which one is speaking, and slowly, gently, decide which one deserves the final vote. Maybe that's the real definition of growing up. Not becoming someone who no longer feels the old instincts, the old wounds, the old social pulls, but becoming someone who can finally hear them clearly enough to choose differently. And if this made you rethink how much of your day is actually yours, wait until you see what happens the moment you're not even alone in the room. Because there's another force quietly shaping your decisions that has nothing to do with your brain at all, and everything to do with the people standing next to you, whether you realize they're influencing you or not.